The Bellevue skyline glittered like crushed diamonds outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, casting a perfect glow over Logan's sleeping profile. But Priya's eyes were fixed on the glowing screen of his unlocked phone, where a single unread message from Mia Martinez read, "The Seaside Inn tomorrow." Same as last time. There was a heavy, suffocating silence in the room, the kind that only descends when a marriage is about to quietly bleed to death. If these fragile, dangerous moments of hidden truths resonate with you, stay with me. There are far more secrets buried behind these closed doors, and if you wanted to see how this unravels, don't leave the channel just yet. The rain in Seattle always felt less like weather and more like an unwelcome guest, heavy and relentless, against the expansive glass front of Urban Nails. Inside, however, Capitol Hill's premier salon was a sanctuary of soft ambient lighting, the faint scent of jasmine oil, and the hushed confidential murmurs of Bellevue housewives and tech executives. Priya Sharma stood behind the sleek marble reception desk, her posture impeccably straight, presenting the picture of a woman entirely in control of her world. At 32, Priya had sculpted her life with the same precision her technicians applied to French tips. She had the thriving business, the sprawling minimalist penthouse across the water in Bellevue and Logan. Logan Hayes, with his effortless charm, sharp custom suits, and a smile that made her feel like the only woman in any crowded room. They were the couple others gossiped about with pure, unadulterated envy. "Earth to Priya," Monica Walsh's voice sliced through the lo-fi beat playing overhead. Monica, Priya's oldest friend and the salon's fiercely protective manager, leaned against the counter, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against the marble. "You've been staring at the appointment book for 5 minutes. The 3 p.m. canceled. You can breathe." Priya blinked, forcing a tight, practiced smile. "Just organizing my thoughts. Logan is hosting that massive real estate dinner tonight. I need to leave by 4 to change." "Ah, yes, the dutiful Bellevue wife of the year," Monica teased, though her dark eyes held a flicker of something calculating. Monica noticed everything. She noticed the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in Priya's fingers, a subtle betrayal of her calm facade. Priya turned her attention to the salon's iPad, intending to review the weekly inventory. But as she swiped the screen, a notification banner dropped down from the top edge. Logan's iCloud account was still synced from when he had used the device to fix a network issue the previous week. It was a fleeting digital ghost, but it was enough to freeze the blood in Priya's veins. "Mia Martinez, the Seaside Inn, tomorrow at 2. Don't be late this time. And bring the envelope." The banner vanished as quickly as it had appeared, swallowed back into the digital void. Mia. The name was a phantom from a past Logan swore he had buried 5 years ago. Mia, the volatile, unpredictable ex-girlfriend who had almost derailed his career before Priya ever came into the picture. The salon's gentle hum faded into a muted underwater distortion in Priya's ears. The Seaside Inn was a secluded, aging coastal hotel an hour outside the city limits, hardly the venue for a midday real estate negotiation. And the envelope. Priya slowly lowered the iPad, the cool metal back biting into the soft flesh of her palm. Her heart didn't race. It simply dropped, a heavy stone plunging into a bottomless well. She looked up, her gaze catching her own reflection in the mirrored wall behind the polish racks. She looked exactly the same. Her dark hair was flawlessly blown out, her silk blouse unwrinkled. But beneath the expensive fabric, a fundamental structural collapse was quietly occurring. Priya, Monica's tone had shifted from teasing to genuine concern. "Hey, you just went completely pale. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Priya lied, the words tasting like ash on her tongue. She tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, her eyes drifting toward the rain-battered street outside. The world was still moving, cars splashing through puddles, people hurrying under black umbrellas. It was a violently ordinary Friday afternoon. Yet the pristine, perfect life she had built was fracturing, a web of hairline cracks spreading out from a single impossible name on a screen. She wasn't going to the real estate dinner tonight. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. she had an appointment at the coast. The drive down Highway 101 was a blur of charcoal clouds and relentless rhythmic windshield wipers. Priya gripped the leather steering wheel of her Lexus until her knuckles turned a translucent white. The coastal wind buffeted the car, but the storm inside her was infinitely more violent. She had told Logan she was spending Saturday afternoon doing inventory at the Capitol Hill salon. He had kissed her forehead, smelling faintly of expensive cedarwood cologne, and said he had a golf networking event in Redmond. The seaside inn materialized through the coastal fog like a rotting tooth against the jagged shoreline. It was a faded two-story motel with peeling seafoam green paint and a neon vacancy sign that flickered with a desperate dying hum. It was the absolute last place Logan Hayes, a man who complained if the thread count at the Four Seasons was subpar, would ever voluntarily visit, unless he had a reason to hide. Priya parked 2 blocks away, pulling up the collar of her trench coat as she stepped into the biting salt-heavy air. She navigated the uneven gravel shoulder, her designer boots crunching softly, until she found a vantage point behind a cluster of wind-battered spruce trees overlooking the motel's rear parking lot. There it was, his slate-gray Audi A8 looking absurdly out of place next to a rusted pickup truck. Priya's breath caught in her throat, a sharp intake of cold air that burned her lungs. The metallic taste of dread flooded her mouth. A heavy wooden door on the second-floor balcony creaked open. Logan stepped out into the dreary afternoon light. He wasn't in his golf attire. He wore a dark, unstructured wool coat, the collar turned up against the wind. And right behind him was Mia Martinez. Priya hadn't seen Mia in half a decade, not since the awkward, tense months when she and Logan first started dating. Mia looked thinner now. Her dark hair whipped wildly by the ocean breeze, but the chaotic magnetic pull she exuded was unmistakable. They stood close, too close for casual acquaintances, too close for a man who claimed this woman was nothing but a regrettable footnote in his past. Priya's trembling hands fumbled in her coat pocket, retrieving her phone. The screen felt slick against her cold fingertips. She opened the camera app, zooming in through the gray drizzle. The pixelated image sharpened. Logan reached inside his coat and produced a thick brown manila envelope. He shoved it toward Mia. It wasn't a gesture of romance. It was sharp, urgent. Yet as Mia took it, her hand lingered over his. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them, her face tilting up toward his. Logan didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He leaned down, his forehead nearly resting against hers, speaking rapidly, his jaw clenched in what Priya could only interpret as intense, desperate passion. To a wife standing freezing in the rain, it was the undeniable tableau of an illicit affair. Priya held her breath and tapped the shutter button. Click, 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 digital evidence of her dying marriage. She captured the touch of their hands, the proximity of their faces, the secret envelope exchanged in the shadows of a cheap motel. Each silent snap of the camera severed another cord of the life she had built in Bellevue. She lowered the phone. The physical pain was startling, a deep, hollow ache expanding in her chest, pressing against her ribs, until she felt she might suffocate. She didn't stay to watch them go back inside or part ways. She turned her back on the ocean in the seaside inn, the gravel crunching louder under her boots as she walked back to her car. The rain masked the tears that finally slipped down her cheeks, but her mind was already shifting, hardening into something cold and unrecognizable. She had the proof. Now she just needed to go home and wait for the liar to return. The penthouse felt cavernous, a cathedral of glass and white marble that echoed with the hollow sound of Priya's footsteps. She hadn't turned on the lights. The blue-gray twilight of a Seattle evening filtered through the windows, casting long, skeletal shadows across the designer furniture. She sat at the kitchen island, the cold stone surface biting into her forearms, her phone resting face down on the counter like a loaded weapon. When the heavy oak door finally clicked open at 8 p.m., the sound was like a gunshot. Logan walked in whistling a low, aimless tune. He tossed his keys into the crystal valet tray and began unbuttoning his charcoal overcoat. He looked refreshed, the cool coastal air still clinging to his skin, a sharp contrast to the trembling sodden wreck Priya had been only hours before. "Hey, babe, you're home early," Logan said, his voice smooth and untroubled. He walked toward the refrigerator, reaching for a bottle of sparkling water. "Inventory go okay at the salon? I thought you were staying late to prep for the quarterly audit." Priya didn't answer. She watched him move, the casual grace, the practiced ease of a man who lived comfortably in a skin made of lies. "Logan, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "How was the golf event in Redmond?" He paused, the refrigerator door hanging open, bathing him in a sterile artificial light. "Fine, windy as hell. My swing was off, but the networking was solid. Why bombending?" Priya picked up her phone. With a slow, deliberate thumb, she tapped the screen and slid it across the marble island. It spun once before coming to a stop directly in front of him. The image was unmistakable. The sea foam green paint of the Seaside Inn, the gray mist, and Logan Hayes standing on a second-floor balcony, his forehead pressed against Mia Martinez's, as they clutched a brown manila envelope between them. The silence that followed was suffocating. Priya expected him to blanch. She expected him to stammer, to fall to his knees, to weave a frantic web of explanations about how it wasn't what it looked like. She waited for the "I'm sorry" that would break her heart, but at least validate her existence. Instead, Logan's shoulders began to shake. A low, guttural sound escaped his throat. It started as a wheeze and grew into a full, resonant laugh. He leaned against the counter, clutching his stomach, the sound bouncing off the high ceilings and glass walls. It was a cruel, mocking sound, the laugh of a man who had watched a child try to perform a magic trick and fail miserably. "The Seaside Inn," he gasped, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. "Priya, really, you drove all the way out there in this weather to play private investigator." "You were with her," Priya whispered, her throat constricting. "I saw the way you looked at her. I saw the envelope, Logan. After everything I did for this family, for your career, you're back with Mia." Logan stopped laughing, but the smirk remained plastered on his face like a scar. He stood up straight, towering over her, his eyes devoid of the warmth she had spent a decade believing in. "You have no idea what you're looking at, Priya. You think this is some cheap paperback romance. You think I'm some cliché husband chasing an old flame." He shook his head, looking at her with genuine pity. "You're so obsessed with your perfect Bellevue life that you can't see past your own nose. This isn't about love, you idiot." He pushed the phone back toward her with a flick of his finger. "Go ahead, post it, send it to your little friend Monica. Call a lawyer. Do whatever makes you feel like the powerful businesswoman you pretend to be," he sneered, turning his back on her to head toward his study. "But don't expect me to crawl. Your little discovery doesn't mean a damn thing to me." He slammed the study door, the vibration rattling the expensive glassware on the shelves. Priya stood alone in the dark kitchen, the echo of his laughter still ringing in her ears. The pain was gone now, replaced by a cold, searing clarity. He hadn't just betrayed her, he had laughed at her. She picked up her phone. Her fingers were no longer trembling. She didn't want an apology anymore. She wanted him to lose every single thing he had ever valued. The neon sign of Urban Nails flickered in the early morning fog of Capitol Hill, a low electric hum that matched the vibration in Priya's chest. She sat in her private office, the door locked, the scent of acetone, an expensive base coat drifting under the crack. Across from her, Monica Walsh sat with a laptop open, her face illuminated by the harsh blue light of a spreadsheet. "You're sure about this?" Monica asked, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Once we pull these threads, Priya, there's no sewing the garment back together." "You're talking about scorched earth." "He laughed, Monica," Priya replied, her voice as flat as the gray Seattle sky. "He didn't just lie. He stood in our kitchen and laughed at the idea that I could hurt him. He thinks I'm a prop in his high-powered life. I want him to realize he's just an occupant in mine." Monica nodded slowly, her fingers flying across the keys. Over the last 72 hours, they had moved with surgical precision. While Logan was out at meetings, Priya had mirrored his phone's cloud storage to a secure drive and granted Monica access to the salon's high-level forensic accountant. "Look at this," Monica said, spinning the laptop around. Priya leaned in. It wasn't just the Seaside Inn. There were wire transfers, staggered erratic amounts moving from their joint investment vehicle into an offshore shell company labeled Hayes Martinez Holdings. "He's draining the liquid assets," Monica whispered. "But it's messy. It's hurried. A man with his background in private equity doesn't leave a paper trail this sloppy unless he's panicked or arrogant enough to think no one is looking." Priya felt a cold shiver. She had spent the last 2 nights sleeping on the far edge of their king-size bed, listening to the steady rhythmic breathing of a man she no longer knew. She had played the part of the wounded but silent wife, letting him believe his laughter had cowed her into submission. Every morning she watched him put on his Brioni suit, adjust his silk tie, and head to his office at the Columbia Center, all while she carried the digital blueprint of his destruction in her handbag. "I want the mistress involved," Priya said, her eyes fixed on Mia's name on the screen. "If he's moving money to her, I want the IRS to see it. I want his board of directors to see the conflict of interest. I want the Bellevue social circles to know that Logan Hayes isn't a genius, he's a thief and a cliché. We can leak the Seaside Inn photos to the Puget Sound Business Journal's gossip tip line tonight. Monica suggested, a predatory glint in her eyes. By Monday morning, his reputation in Seattle real estate will be underwater. Priya stared at a photo of them from last year's gala, Logan's arm around her waist, his smile radiant. She felt a momentary pang of vertigo, the ghost of the love she thought they shared. But then she remembered the sound of his laughter in the dark kitchen, the way he had called her an idiot. "Do it," Priya said. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the freeway. The traffic was crawling, a sea of red taillights bleeding into the asphalt. She was no longer just a woman scorned. She was a predator, waiting for the trap to spring. She didn't care about the money anymore, or even the marriage. She wanted to see the moment the laughter died in his throat. But as she watched the rain streak the glass, a small nagging detail from the spreadsheet bothered her. The transfers to Mia weren't just going out, they were being demanded in specific, frantic intervals. It didn't look like a gift for a mistress. It looked like a ransom. The glow of the dual monitors in her home office felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. It was 3 a.m. in Bellevue, and the quiet of the penthouse was absolute save for the hum of the cooling fans. Priya had bypassed Logan's secondary firewall using a birthday sequence password he'd never bothered to change. She had expected to find a folder of intimate photos, perhaps a secret lease for a condo in Queen Anne, where he kept Mia Martinez. Instead, she found Project Obsidian. Her mouse hovered over a series of PDF documents. As she scrolled, the air in the room seemed to thin. These weren't love letters. They were forged land deeds, manipulated escrow wire transfers, and internal memos from Logan's firm that had been digitally altered to hide a massive deficit in the East Side Waterfront Development Fund. Priya leaned back, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She opened a subfolder titled MM Correspondence. "Logan, the SEC is flagging the June audit. If you don't get the remaining $3 million into the offshore account by Friday, I'm sending the original ledgers to the feds. I'm not going to jail for your vision. Mia." The realization hit Priya with the force of a physical blow. The Seaside Inn meeting hadn't been a romantic tryst. The envelope wasn't a gift, it was a payment. The lingering touch, the forehead to forehead, whispering it wasn't passion. It was two conspirators standing on the edge of a cliff, arguing over who would jump first. Logan hadn't laughed at her because he was an arrogant cheater. He had laughed because her accusations of a cheap affair were so pathetically small compared to the ruin he was actually facing. He had used her jealousy as a shield, letting her believe he was a wandering husband so she wouldn't look deep enough to see he was a white-collar criminal. "Oh, Logan," she whispered into the dark room. The revenge she had planned, the public shaming, the social exile, suddenly felt like throwing a pebble at a collapsing skyscraper. If she leaked those photos now, if she triggered the audit she and Monica had discussed, she wouldn't just be ruining Logan. She would be providing the final piece of evidence the authorities needed to seize every asset they owned. The penthouse urban nails, her reputation. It was all collateral in a game she hadn't known she was playing. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Priya froze her hand, flying to the monitor to dim the brightness. She watched the door handle. It didn't turn, but she saw the shadow of feet lingering in the gap at the bottom of the door. Logan was awake. He was standing out there in the dark, perhaps wondering if his wife was finally digging too deep. She realized then that Mia Martinez wasn't his mistress. She was his executioner. And by trying to win the breakup, Priya had walked right into the middle of the gallows. She wasn't just a woman scorned anymore. She was an accomplice by proximity, tied to a sinking ship by a marriage license and a shared bank account. The weight of the secret was crushing. She looked at the delete key, then at the save to external drive icon. The choice she made in the next 10 seconds would determine if she spent the next decade in a Bellevue mansion or a federal glass-walled interview room. The Monday morning rush at Urban Nails felt like a performance in a theater that was slowly catching fire. Priya moved through the salon, greeting her high-profile clients with a smile that felt like a porcelain mask. Behind the scenes, her phone vibrated incessantly with messages from Monica, who was growing increasingly frantic as the leaks they had planned began to circulate in the smaller social blogs. "Priya, we need to pull back," Monica whispered, pulling her into the supply closet. The scent of acrylic powder was suffocating. "I looked into those Project Obsidian files you sent me last night. This isn't just a scandal, babe. This is federal. If we link Logan to Mia Martinez through those Seaside Inn photos, now we're handing the prosecution a roadmap to our own bank accounts. I know, Priya said, her voice hollow. I'm trying to find a way out, but the more I look, the more I realize Logan has tied my signature to half of those shell companies. The chime over the salon door rang. It wasn't a client. Mia Martinez walked in looking far more polished than she had at the rain-soaked motel. She wore a tailored camel coat and oversized sunglasses that she slid up into her dark hair. She didn't look like a mistress, she looked like a debt collector. I'd like a manicure, Mia said, her eyes meeting Priya's in the large decorative mirror. The most expensive one you have. I think I've earned a bit of pampering, don't you? Priya signaled for Monica to stay back and walked toward the manicure station herself. The air between the two women was electric, a silent hum of mutual destruction. As Priya took Mia's hand, cold, steady, and dangerously calm, she felt a surge of pure, unadulterated loathing. He doesn't have the rest of the money, does he? Mia murmured, her voice barely audible over the soft jazz playing in the salon. She didn't look at Priya, she watched her own reflection. Logan is a brilliant architect of dreams, Priya, but he's a terrible builder of foundations. He's been skimming from the East Side Project for 2 years to keep your little Bellevue life afloat. Is that what you tell yourself? Priya whispered back, her grip tightening on Mia's fingers as she began to file. That you're doing this for justice. You're a blackmailer, Mia. You're just as dirty as he is. Maybe, Mia conceded with a sharp, thin smile. But I'm the one with the original ledgers. Logan thought he could replace me with a safer model, someone who wouldn't ask questions about where the penthouse money came from. He chose you because you were blinded by the glitter. But the glitter is fading, isn't it? Mia leaned in her voice, dropping to a chilling hiss. Tell your husband that the Seaside Inn was the last warning. If the final transfer doesn't hit the account by midnight tomorrow, I'm going to the FBI. And I'll make sure they know exactly how much you knew Priya. I'll make sure the successful businesswoman goes down as the wife who laundered the loot. Mia pulled her hand away, stood up, and tossed a $100 bill onto the table without waiting for her polish to dry. She walked out of the salon, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and the lingering scent of a life about to end. Priya stood frozen, the file still in her hand. The revenge she had wanted to see Logan crawl was now a secondary concern. The stakes had shifted from a broken heart to a prison cell. She realized then that Logan's laughter hadn't been just at her. It had been the sound of a man who knew they were both already dead, they just hadn't stopped breathing yet. The sky over Seattle had turned a bruised, sickly purple, pouring a deluge that turned the I-5 north into a river of oil and light. Inside the Audi, the air was thick with the smell of Logan's sweat and the ozone of a dying marriage. He was driving like a man possessed, his knuckles white against the steering wheel, his eyes darting incessantly to the rearview mirror. She has the ledgers, Logan. She was at the salon, Priya screamed over the rhythmic thud of the wipers. She's going to the feds at midnight. We're out of time. I can fix it, Logan roared back, his voice cracking with a desperation she had never heard. He swerved around a semi-truck, the car hydroplaning for a terrifying second before the tires gripped the asphalt again. I have a meeting in Everett, a private lender. If I can just get the bridge loan, I can pay her off and bury the Project Obsidian files forever. There is no fixing this. Priya reached out, grabbing his arm, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and terror. You used me, Logan. You signed my name to those shell companies. You didn't just cheat on our marriage, you sold my soul to keep your ego inflated. I did it for us, he countered, his face illuminated by the harsh red glow of 1,000 brake lights ahead. You liked the penthouse, Priya. You liked the front row seats and the designer bags. Don't act like you weren't a willing passenger on this ride. The accusation stung worse than the betrayal. The truth was a jagged blade, and they were both bleeding out. Suddenly, a set of headlights bloomed in the rearview mirror, a dark SUV weaving through traffic with reckless abandon. Priya's heart seized. She didn't need to see the driver to know it was Mia. The blackmailer wasn't waiting for midnight. She was hunting them down, perhaps realized that Logan was trying to flee the city. She's behind us, Priya whispered, her eyes wide. Logan looked back, his face contorting into a mask of pure panic. She's not getting those files to anyone. He floored the accelerator, The Audi surged forward, weaving through the narrow gaps between commuters. The world outside became a blur of gray mist and streaking lights. Priya screamed as they clipped the side mirror of a sedan, the sound of grinding metal lost to the roar of the storm. "Stop the car, Logan. You are going to kill us. I'm saving us." They reached the Ship Canal Bridge, the high-rise steel structure slick with ice and rain. Logan checked the mirror again, his foot heavy on the ground, but as he turned back to the road, the sea of red brake lights in front of them had come to a dead halt. "Logan, look out!" He slammed on the brakes. The anti-lock system pulsed violently, but the tires were no match for the sheet of water covering the bridge. The Audi spun a slow-motion carousel of terror. Priya saw the concrete barrier rushing toward them, then the blinding glare of Mia's SUV as it failed to stop barreling into their passenger side with a bone-shattering crunch. Glass exploded inward like 1,000 diamonds. The world inverted. There was the smell of burning rubber, the sound of twisting steel, and then a sudden horrifying silence that swallowed the city whole. Priya felt the cold rain hitting her face through the shattered windshield. She tried to move, but her body felt disconnected, a ghost trapped in a cage of metal. She turned her head slowly, her vision blurring. Next to her, Logan was slumped over the deployed airbag, his expensive suit soaked in crimson, his eyes staring blankly at the dashboard. The man who had laughed at her was finally silent. On the freeway behind them, the sirens began to wail, a lonely, high-pitched morning song, echoing over the dark waters of Lake Union. The silence of the new apartment was louder than the sirens had ever been. It was a small, functional unit in a brick building in Lower Queen Anne, miles away from the glass-walled arrogance of the Bellevue penthouse. There were no marble countertops here, no designer light fixtures, just the smell of fresh paint and the steady rhythmic drumming of the Seattle rain against a single drafty window. 6 months had passed since the night on the Ship Canal Bridge. The headlines had feasted on the story for weeks: real estate moguls, double life ends in tragedy, wife cleared of criminal intent. Priya sat on the edge of a lone packing crate, a lukewarm cup of coffee cradled in her hands. Her physical wounds had healed into thin silvery lines on her shoulder and forehead, but the internal fractures remained unknitted. Logan had died before the paramedics could cut him out of the wreckage. Mia Martinez, the woman who had held their lives in a stranglehold, was serving 10 years in a federal penitentiary for extortion in her role in the financial collapse of the East Side Project. Priya had survived, but survival felt like a heavy, ill-fitting coat. Monica had helped her sell Urban Nails. It was the only way to pay off the back taxes and the predatory legal fees Logan had accumulated in her name. The comeback Priya had dreamed of, the one where she stood triumphant over his ruin, had materialized, but it tasted like copper and ash. She had her freedom, but she was a ghost in her own city. A soft chime echoed in the empty room. A news alert on her phone: Bellevue Penthouse sold to tech CEO for record sum. Priya didn't click the link. She knew every inch of that penthouse. She knew where the shadows fell at noon and where Logan used to hide his spare cufflink keys. She also knew the exact spot on the kitchen island where he had stood and laughed at her. That laughter haunted her more than the crash itself. It was the sound of a world built on sand, a reminder that she had spent a decade loving a man who viewed her as a decorative accessory to his crimes. She stood up and walked to the window. Below, the city was a blur of gray and yellow taxi lights. People were going home to their dinners, their secrets, and their complicated, messy lives. She wondered how many of them were living in houses made of glass, waiting for the first stone to be thrown. She had sought the truth with a desperate, scorched earth fury. She had wanted to unmask the villain, to peel back the layers of betrayal, until there was nothing left but the raw, honest core of their marriage. And she had succeeded. She had found the truth, and it had set her free of her home, her business, her husband, and the woman she used to be. The apartment was cold. Priya didn't turn on the heater. She simply watched her reflection in the dark glass, a silhouette against the flickering lights of the Space Needle. She was no longer the polished owner of Urban Nails or the envied wife of a Bellevue titan. She was just Priya, a woman standing in an empty room, listening to the echoes of a life that had never truly belonged to her. She reached out and touched the cold glass. The rain continued to fall, washing away the grime of the city, but leaving the stains beneath untouched. There was no one left to lie to her, no one left to laugh, and no one left to hold. In the end, the cost of knowing everything was having nothing left to lose.